All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me and welcome to our first ever webinar on the Everything Disc Productive Conflict Profile. So I'm very excited to be running this webinar with you. We really haven't had too much content done on this profile before, aside from the initial showcase, which, we're planning to change now because it is such a fantastic profile. And I think, something to really discuss with this profile is often even just the word conflict turns a lot of people away from discussing something. So, the name productive conflict still contains that conflict, and often that's a little bit confronting to people. But one of the reasons I love this profile so much, and what's important to recognize, is this was actually one of the first everything, or it was the first everything profile that actually also incorporates cognitive behavioral therapy, which is starting to look at what's actually driving the behaviors that DISC examines. So it's starting to look at our automatic thoughts and go a level deeper. So we're going to get into today's webinar for the next half hour, and we're going to go over what productive conflict actually is and how we can engage in it to ensure that we're encouraging healthy workplace relationships and cultures. So what is conflict? Defined simply, it's a difference of opinions involving strong emotions. And usually it's quite a serious disagreement or argument, and typically protracted, so it's ongoing. And I'm sure all of you could throw out some examples at me of displays of conflict that you've seen in the workplace. So some of the most common ones I've put up on the screen for you. For example, drama, which is displaying an over-the-top reaction to a situation. Gossiping, which is when someone engages in idle talk about someone else's private affairs. Passive aggression, where we express negative feelings in a subtle or indirect way, or maybe we're intentionally not even engaging in a discussion. That's still classed as conflict. Or excluding someone, so deliberately leaving them out. And the odds are that you've all experienced some form or engaged in even some form of conflict like these. And so while this is only a small example of some of the ways that conflict is demonstrated, really destructive behaviors like this, they do present a significant and measurable drag on engagement, efficiency, retention, and overall performance in today's workplace. So we can all agree that these are very negative and very unhealthy behaviors to see in a workplace, and none of us want that. And to demonstrate the extent and the negative impact that unhealthy conflict can have on a culture, back in 2019, when Wiley was developing the productive conflict profile, they did a survey of about 12,000 participants looking at conflict. And what they found was that 90% of the responses they received were negative, so negative associations to conflict. And on top of this, some of the statistics that they found was that 40% of those people had left a job because of unhealthy conflict. And 70% of managers, directors, and executives all said that conflict negatively impacted their department's efficiency. We also had 69% who said job satisfaction would improve if their co-workers handled conflict more effectively. And managers, directors, and executives spent an average of 3.2 hours a week dealing with conflict. So really, if you consider a standard 38-hour work week, that's nearly a month a year of time that these high-level managers, directors, executives are spending dealing with conflict, which is time that they could be spending on performance-driven initiatives and actually doing their jobs. So it's very negative, not only in the impact that it has for your staff and your culture, but also even on your bottom line and your productivity. So really, this is something that's applicable to every workplace and something that we should be addressing. But I would hazard a guess that only a handful of organizations are actively addressing conflict in their workplace. And the truth is that conflict doesn't go away on its own. It is something that we have to address and make sure that we're harnessing it in a productive way. So the takeaway is that conflict has a huge impact on employee and organizational experience. And while it's an uncomfortable thing, it's also very unavoidable and something that every workplace will experience. So in order for organizations to thrive in today's modern working environment, they have to make sure that they're teaching their workforce how they can engage in productive conflict. And we actually do need productive conflict. We can't just ignore conflict as a whole. We do need productive conflict because it's what allows us to ensure that we hear differing opinions, that everyone speaks up, has their say, everyone's buying into discussions, and maybe speaking up and presenting a different side to an argument that no one else had even thought about. So if we're not engaging in productive conflict, we're missing a lot of factors. And productive conflict, it's a good thing, and it's far more enjoyable and beneficial than just straight conflict. So it's very, very different. So to get clear on what is productive conflict and what makes the distinction between something being negative conflict and something being healthy and necessary for an organization, productive conflict is defined as an open exchange of differing ideas in which parties feel equally heard, respected, and unafraid to voice dissenting opinions for the purpose of reaching a mutually comfortable resolution. So productive conflict is focused on concepts and ideas, and it completely avoids any sort of mean-spirited personal attack. And that's why productive conflict actually produces the results that you want. It results in better, more informed decisions for companies, teams, individuals, without creating any negative feelings along with that for the people involved. So what it involves is an open exchange of different ideas and opinions, productively engaging in conflict in the moment. So at the very beginning, when I spoke about people maybe not engaging in a discussion at all, that is still a form of conflict. We want everyone to be engaged and participating in the moment. All parties involved have to feel equally heard, respected, and unafraid to voice different opinions. They have to feel they can speak up. And what this does is it helps us reach mutually beneficial solutions. So effectively, you could really say that if engaged in productively, conflict is integral to organizational success. And when two or more people are able to engage in productive conflict in the moment that it's happening, they can actually debate the issues in front of them and solve some tough problems with much more efficiency. So you could look at it that potentially today's struggle leads to tomorrow's breakthrough, and you're not having any of those leftover negative feelings and strained relationships that you get from standard conflict. Now, I think another reason why people shy away from discussing conflict is also the way that it has typically been handled in the past, which is through what people call conflict resolution. And conflict resolution is a process of resolving a dispute without confrontation. It's reactively addressing conflict, so it's happening after the fact, after the conflict has happened. And usually it's involving negotiation, mediation, or arbitration. And the aim is to eliminate conflict with a step-by-step process. But again, the big key is that this is all occurring after we've already had the conflict. We've already had that negative interaction. And this is the key distinction when it comes to productive conflict, is we don't want to be on the back foot and trying to overcome conflict that's already happened. We want to avoid unhealthy conflict and ensure that interactions are productive from the start by focusing on those distinctions we made earlier. So keeping conflict focused on concepts and ideas, avoiding mean-spirited personal attacks, and engaging in productive conflict. So the open exchange of different ideas, engaging in the moment, allowing everyone to feel heard and have the ability to speak up, and reaching that mutually comfortable solution so you're not left with all of the negative associations. So there's nothing necessarily wrong with conflict resolution, and it's been around for many, many, many years. It's probably not going to go away anytime soon. But the key is that it does assume conflict has already occurred. And so now you have two people who have to spend their time and their energy after the fact to resolve what's happened. And most likely it will also involve a manager or a mediator, which is where we start to see how managers are losing those 3.2 hours a week to resolving conflict situations, and why staff are losing their sense of job satisfaction when they're engaged in unhealthy conflict. So everything DISC productive conflict takes the approach that rather than resolving conflict after it's happened, how can we teach people to effectively navigate conflict through the lens of engaging in productive conflict? So how do we do that? How do we go about engaging in productive conflict? Well, the thing is that conflict is going to look different to each person. So depending on the people involved in the situation that's happening, there's no one size fits all solution. But instead, that solution has to start with you, the individual. And this is why productive conflict, as with all DISC profiles, is completely personalized to you and works through a very clear structure. So step one is where we learn about our DISC style and our DISC style in conflict. So our natural tendencies as well as our automatic responses. The next step is that we start to understand those tendencies and some of the destructive responses that we most likely engage in, sometimes even subconsciously, but it's actually learning to stop and identify these and knowing when they're happening. Next up, once we've identified what's happening, we can stop and reframe our responses to reach a productive outcome. So the profile is basically personalized and it's very pragmatic in order to help you create change and to change your natural responses and achieve the best outcome. So just out of interest and as a bit of a condensed view here when we're looking at DISC and conflict, so we look at those first and second stages of the profile, going through and identifying our natural responses and automatic thoughts, we do come to realize that we all have natural tendencies that we revert to during stressful situations. And this is largely based on our DISC style. So we can bring it all back to DISC. And how does DISC relate to conflict behaviors? Well, based on what our DISC style is, we're most likely going to have automatic responses that are more or less natural for us, both in terms of the productive behaviors that we display and the destructive behaviors. So up here on the slide, you can see I've put together just a quick snapshot to look at some examples of different productive and destructive behaviors that DISC styles will most likely engage in. And this is all brought up in the profile and examined as to how that looks for you. So it's that self-awareness piece. All right. And next up, why do we respond destructively? Well, for most of us, conflict situations are very confronting, and it's on a level, it's quite threatening to us. So it's our natural instinct to protect ourselves, which is why we become defensive often. And usually we do this so quickly that we're not even thinking about it. But under the surface of our consciousness, there is a process playing out, which is that we have conflict, and this conflict incident is going to trigger an automatic thought, which in turn triggers us to exhibit a destructive response. So most of this is done out of habit, and it's not even something that we're consciously aware on. And sometimes we don't even realize that we've had a destructive response until after the fact. So I'm sure we've all had instances where we were involved in a conflict situation and we've walked away from it and all thought that we could have handled that better, or I wish I had done this, rather than just, engaging in that first thought and first response that came to mind. So the first step is for us to become aware of what's happening and to become conscious of these thoughts. So as soon as we become conscious of an automatic thought occurring, rather than just triggering a destructive response, if we can become aware of that automatic thought that's happened during conflict, we need to stop and take a step back and just pause so that we can adjust the outcome. So as you can see here on the screen, we've had our conflict, an automatic thought has occurred, we've stepped back, and we've reframed that automatic thought. So we're reframing and we're actually halting that destructive process, and reframing it to something more positive in order to adjust our approach and thinking to reach a productive outcome. And this is the whole premise of the productive conflict profile. So what it does is it's helping participants become aware of automatic thoughts. And it does this through proposing situations and potential thoughts that they most likely have experienced due to their DISC style. And this is where the cognitive behavioral theory comes in. Cognitive behavior is, or cognitive behavioral theory is based on psychopathology. And the cognitive model describes how people's perceptions of or their spontaneous thoughts about a situation will influence their emotional, behavioral, and physiological reactions to that situation. So it focuses on challenging and changing unhelpful cognitive distortions and behaviors, and actually improving our ability to regulate our emotions and our responses, which helps with the development of personal coping strategies, which will help to create more productive responses. So this is where that catch and reframe stage 3 on your screens, comes in. We catch and reframe an automatic thought so that we can consciously choose a more productive response. So we're actually learning to interrupt the unconscious cascade of reactions that we have to conflict before the situation actually gets away from us and before we can react in a negative way and create destructive conflict. And so the concept of becoming aware of automatic thoughts is quite tough. This is, again, something that we have to work on. And half the battle is actually bringing these automatic thoughts to the surface and being able to recognize them. So a lot of the profile involves self-reflection and looking honestly at how easy and hard a productive response is for us. And so there's some examples up on the screen. And what the profile does is it gets you to actually honestly look at a productive response to conflict and step back and go, how easy or hard is that for me? So that when you find yourself in a situation where you need to display that behavior, where you can recognize that that behavior is needed, you already have a bit of an idea as to whether your automatic response is going to be productive or unhelpful, and how much you need to stop and step back and reframe. So in this example, I've just put how easy or how hard is it for me to apologize when I know that I've been wrong in a situation? Is it easy? Is it difficult? Do some scenarios make it better? How can I become better at identifying my response to these situations? And this is just an example of some of the personalization and the action planning that's involved in this profile. And the productive conflict profile is almost a workbook in itself. It has so much content in it, which is great because it really draws learners in. It's allowing them to personalize, to reflect on themselves. And there's lots of action planning as well to actually make sure that people are getting the most out of this profile. All right, but engaging in conflict in the moment that it's happening, it doesn't remove the discomfort that comes along with that. So conflict is always uncomfortable, but it's just learning to stretch ourselves. So, we talk about stretching ourselves in DISC a lot. We will obviously have our natural responses, which are going to be more comfortable for us, but we have to learn to stretch ourselves. And we have to look at what does it actually take to create an environment where people can engage in productive conflict. And so this is where we're going back to, this is what DISC does and what productive conflict does. So we have an individual understanding of ourselves and others. So the profiles always start out and they're really focused on you as an individual and getting to understand yourself better. And then we start to expand that knowledge to, okay, well, this is my DISC style in conflict. How do other styles most likely react to conflict as well? From this, we can start recognizing destructive thoughts and our natural responses, so our automatic responses, and how this is most likely going to affect us in conflict. So what we can do by actually recognizing that is we can catch and reframe those thoughts when conflict occurs. And this is where we can choose a more productive response. So this is where, coming back to, you may not necessarily have control of the conflict situation, but you can choose how you react to it. But we need to step back and choose a productive response. And we all need to be committed to finding mutually comfortable solutions. So as with everything, this is all part of ongoing personal development. It's not something that happens overnight. It does require consistent work. And that's where things like the personalization and the action planning really comes in as a very important part of any profile and any development that you complete with your staff or clients. So as we start wrapping up, this is a very high level look at the productive conflict. So what we've done is we've gone through the detail of what productive conflict is, why it's so necessary for individuals. But now if we look at the big picture, this is what I want you to go away with and to have a think about. So think about how this profile, the productive conflict profile, and the concepts and the cognitive behavioral theory behind it can be in use for your clients, your organization, your workplace, and for you personally on an everyday basis. So the importance of productive conflict. The model on the screen is actually from one of our other programs, which is called the 5 behaviours. And that's a model that I'm sure many of you have heard about. It's based on Patrick Lencioni's work when he wrote the book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which if you haven't read is a great book looking at leadership and teamwork. But the concept is that basically we have this pyramid and all of these factors build on each other. These are the behaviours that have been identified that teams need to engage in to be truly cohesive. So what a truly cohesive team requires is vulnerability-based trust, which you can see at the base of the pyramid. They need to be able to engage in productive conflict. So largely all what this discussion today has been about, conflict, and by that we mean productive conflict. Commitment is the next step, and we get that through clarity and buy-in. And like I discussed, if we're not having conflict and we're not hearing everyone's ideas and not everyone is speaking up, or people are just sitting back, engaging in unhealthy conflict, not having their say, or they're making it personal, we're never going to be able to commit to one decision or the next steps. So we're never going to get that commitment. If we don't have commitment, we can't then have accountability, because you can't hold someone accountable if you haven't committed to something in the first place. And the last step in this pyramid is team-focused results. So how this ties into DISC and why the 5 behaviours model does tie in really nicely with DISC is because DISC is the foundation of helping people to get to know one another better. So especially in workplace, we're looking at our communication. How can we communicate better? How can we create understanding and a common language? And what this starts doing is it builds trust. It's an understanding of each other, getting to know each other better. And by doing so, we build trust, which is the first of the 5 behaviours. Productive conflict obviously then comes next. And if, like I just said, if you don't really nail this stage and you're not engaging in productive conflict, you're going to have serious trouble with actually building on any of the further behaviours. So if you're not having that productive conflict around your ideas and your thoughts, and you're not having open, honest discussions, then there's no way that you can truly commit to decisions. And therefore, without commitment, there's no accountability. And without accountability, you're not going to achieve any team-focused results. So the detriments to having unhealthy conflict goes beyond all of those statistics I gave you earlier, goes beyond the 3.2 hours per week that managers spend dealing with conflict, or the 40% of people who leave a job because of destructive conflict. It goes further than that, that it's actually a key part and it is required. So like I said, conflict isn't something that we can brush under the rug. We actually have to take it and we have to make it productive in order to see the benefits that come from productive conflict. And another reason that I bring this up is that one of the most common questions we get here at Integro is, how can you create a pathway for learners? So when they're starting to learn about DISC, what are the next steps? And all of the DISC profiles are designed to build onto one another. But productive conflict is one profile that fits really nicely with so many other profiles. For example, you could use it after workplace as a stepping stone, or you could use it as an accompaniment to the Agile EQ profile that I discussed the other week, because both the Agile EQ and the productive conflict have that focus on cognitive behavioral therapy, and they're going deeper than just looking at behaviors. They're actually looking at subconscious thoughts. So, and the last stage is that you can see from this model that productive conflict also ties in brilliantly well with the 5 behaviours programs. So both the personal development profile and the team profile. And you can either use it as a precursor when you're preparing a team to move into the 5 behaviours, or you can use it as a follow-up for any teams that have been through the 5 behaviours profile and that's really highlighted productive conflict as an area of improvement for them. So there are so many ways that this profile can fit into the pathways that you're creating for learners and the programs that you're using to develop individuals. So it is a brilliant profile, and one which I think has a place in every workplace. It is one of my favorites. So to help you with this, I always like to provide this slide just to give you an idea. We do obviously have facilitator kits that go with the productive conflict profile. So you get your slides, handouts, scripts, all of the videos, examples of DISC styles in conflict, which are really great for people to see, to demonstrate so they can actually relate it to their workplace and their experiences. There's the virtual activity guides, which have been created to take those facilitator kits and deliver them virtually online if any of us is still not able to do face-to-face sessions. Participants get access to myeverythingdisc.com, unlimited comparison reports, and the productive conflict profile is also going to be included in Catalyst. So it isn't currently released yet as a profile in Catalyst, but every learner who's going through Catalyst now and completing the Catalyst survey, you will have the option in the future, once this becomes available, and sadly we don't have an exact idea of when that will be, but it will become available in Catalyst, and you will be able to grant your learners access to productive conflict. It is typically 20 credits on its own, but like I imagine that there will mostly be some sort of discount scheme when it becomes available via Catalyst. And the other thing is that if any of you are learning a bit about productive conflict, or you want to learn a little bit more, I am going to be doing a bit of a conscious push on this profile for the next few weeks and the next month, say. So do keep an eye out. There'll be an upcoming blog on the topic, and please feel free to reach out with any questions that you may have on this profile, how you go about using it, anything else like that. On that note, if you would like to try the profile for yourself and experience a virtual facilitation, we do have a short course that will be coming up on the 24th of March, focused on the productive conflict profile. So you complete a profile ahead of time, and then you'll attend the training, which is 2 hours online, and see how the profile is facilitated. But lastly, because I like to wrap up these sessions with something for you all to mull over, and I would like you to think about how this personally relates to you. Productive conflict requires self-awareness to bring the best of your personality style to a conflict, and also establishing norms that encourage behaviours where everyone feels heard, considered, and understood. So really consolidating everything that we've just been discussing. So for you, how do you engage in and encourage productive conflict? So as an individual or as an organisation or someone in HR, L&D, everyone needs to ensure that they're creating situations where people have the ability to engage in productive conflict. And this begins with some important factors. As I've just said, building trust, developing self-awareness, and establishing norms. So staff and people in your organization, they can't be fearful of engaging in productive conflict. Hence why the first behavior in the 5 behaviors is trust. They have to trust that they can engage in productive conflict and be vulnerable with their teammates. So the productive conflict profile is a great way of introducing productive conflict to the norm of an organization, to actually get it out in the open and start discussing it in a safe situation. The profile is written very positively, and so it actually does provide a really nice forum where people can get this out in the open. And what I mean when I said earlier that it's essential to set conflict norms, we mean by this, what do we actually need and expect from one another to engage in healthy conflict, in productive conflict? How do we do this? And some examples of ways that you could do this, considering the DISC styles in your group, is maybe agreeing to set out agendas at least 24 hours in advance. So your team members, like your C's and your S's, who like to really prepare and think about their responses, have time to do that. Maybe it's openly inviting others to challenge your opinion. So asking if someone actually does have a different opinion, or is there anything I'm missing here? This is really great for like the D and I sort of styles who maybe get a little bit carried away or who can be a little bit dominant in discussions. And another thing to remember is potentially if you're the leader of the group, maybe you should try to speak last. So let everyone else have their say first, because often it's very difficult for people to actually challenge their leader or to disagree with what a leader has already said. So these are just some ideas to get you started, but the main thing to take away is that even though our association of conflict is often very strongly negative, if we can turn uncomfortable scenarios into productive ones by engaging in productive conflict, then we're all going to be better off as individuals. We're all going to enjoy our jobs more, and we'll be able to experience healthy cultures in our organization. So thank you very much for joining me. I will have a quick question. If anyone does have anything that they'd like to discuss, like I mentioned, the productive conflict profile is 20 credits, and I do have a question here. Thank you, Mel. Can you use existing data to do the productive conflict profile? Yes, all of the DISC profiles, you can use existing data to generate these. So that will save your participant from actually having to answer all of those base questions again. It shuts down, or it shortens, sorry, their completion time by using the existing data, and that will also remove any risk of their dot location changing, which is very helpful for facilitators as well. So I think that is currently all of our Q&As and questions. Like I said, you can reach me in the office here at Integro, or feel free to email me, samantha@integro.com.au. Like I mentioned, I think this is one of our most brilliant but sadly underutilized profiles. So if anyone is looking to add another profile to their business and what they use, then I think this would be a really great one and ties into a lot of our other profiles very, very well. So thank you all for joining. Thank you, Ricky. That's lovely. And I really appreciate you all for joining me. So thank you. Have a great day.